My family ignored me for 10 years for my adopted brother. When they begged me for $50,000 to save him, I gave them fake bills, and he got arrested when he tried using them at a casino. I'm 23 years old, studying finance and about to graduate at the top of my class. And honestly, I never thought I'd get to this point after everything that happened with my family. The thing is, I need to tell this story because what I did a few months ago still has me thinking about whether I went too far or if I just did what I had to do. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was 8 years old and my parents decided to adopt a kid, I remember perfectly the day my parents sat me down in the living room and told me, "Rachel, we're going to have a new member in the family. We're going to adopt a 7-year-old boy named Dylan." I was super excited, you know? I always wanted a brother or sister, and I thought it was going to be great to have someone to play with. My parents told me Dylan had had a difficult life and that we needed to give him lots of love and support, and I was totally on board with that. I was a good kid, optimistic, and I really thought we were going to be a happy family. The day Dylan came home was weird. I remember my mom and dad were super nervous, running all over the house making sure everything was perfect. They had completely redecorated the guest room for him, like with new furniture, a new bed, new toys, everything new. My room stayed the same as always, but well, I didn't think much about it at that moment. Dylan was quiet at first, kind of shy, but my parents were constantly hovering over him asking if he needed anything, if he was comfortable, if he wanted this or that. I tried to talk to him and play with him, but honestly, I felt like my parents wouldn't let me get too close because they were too busy attending to him. The first few weeks were okay, I guess. Dylan started to adapt, and I tried to be a good big sister. But then something started to become noticeable that at first I thought was temporary, but ended up being the pattern for the next 10 years of my life. My 9th birthday came like 3 months after Dylan arrived home, and I remember I was super excited because my parents always made my birthdays special. But that year was different. The day came and my parents gave me a gift. It was like a doll or something. Nothing special. But then they gave Dylan 3 gifts. 3. On my birthday. My mom said, "It's just that Dylan feels excluded when he sees you receive gifts and he doesn't, so we thought it would be good to include him so he feels part of the family." I was 9 years old and didn't fully understand what was happening, but I remember feeling something weird in my stomach, like a sensation that something wasn't right. And that's how it all started, basically. Every time it was my birthday, Dylan received gifts too. Every Christmas, he received more things than me. My parents justified this saying that Dylan needed more because he came from a difficult situation and needed to feel loved and valued. And I understood that. I really understood it. But at the same time, I wondered, what about me? Don't I? You need to feel loved and valued too? But I never said anything because I didn't want to be the selfish, mean girl who complained that her adopted brother was getting attention. Over the years, things only got worse. Dylan started to realize the power he had over my parents and used it constantly. If I wanted to go somewhere or do some activity, my parents would say we didn't have money or there wasn't time. But if Dylan wanted something, magically the money and time would appear. When I was 11 and Dylan was 10, he wanted karate classes. My parents enrolled him immediately, bought all the equipment, took him to every class, and stayed watching the whole time. I had been asking for piano lessons literally for years, and they always told me it was too expensive. Can you believe it? Family outings were the worst. We always went where Dylan wanted to go. If he wanted to go to the amusement park, we went to the amusement park. If he wanted to go to the movies to see an action movie that I hated, we went to see that movie. When I suggested something, my parents would say, "Oh, Rachel, don't be difficult. Dylan really wants to do this and we need to make him happy." It was like my opinion didn't matter at all. And the worst part is that Dylan knew it and enjoyed it. Sometimes he'd look at me with this kind of sadistic smile when my parents chose what he wanted over what I wanted, and I realized he was manipulating the whole situation. At school, I was an excellent student, always got good grades, was on the honor roll, participated in extracurricular activities that didn't cost money because I knew my parents weren't going to pay for anything for me. Dylan was an average student, nothing special, but my parents acted like every C he got was an incredible achievement. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, my parents would say, "Very good, Rachel," and that was it. When Dylan brought home a B, my parents celebrated it like he'd won the Nobel Prize, took him to dinner at his favorite restaurant, bought him something special. I would sit in my room and cry, wondering what I had to do for my parents to see me the same way they saw Dylan. My best friend back then was named Megan, and she was basically the only person who understood me. I spent a lot of time at her house because honestly, I didn't want to be at mine. Her parents were super nice to me, and I think they realized something wasn't right in my family. Although I never talked much about it because I was embarrassed to admit that my own parents didn't love me as much as they loved my adopted brother. Megan listened when I needed to vent and always told me, "Rachel, this isn't right. Your parents are being super unfair to you." And she was right. But I didn't know what to do about it. When I got to my teenage years, the situation was unbearable. Dylan was like 13 or 14 and was a complete manipulator at that point. He had learned exactly what buttons to push with my parents to get what he wanted, and he had no problem throwing me under the bus to benefit himself. If something broke in the house, he'd say I did it, and my parents would believe him automatically without even asking me my version. If there was any conflict between us, Dylan would cry and say I was bothering him or being mean to him, and my parents would punish me without even listening to my side of the story. The breaking point, the moment when I decided I couldn't take it anymore, was my 16th birthday. I had been planning this party for weeks, had invited my friends from school, had everything organized. The only thing I had specifically asked for, the only thing, was a vanilla cake, because my whole life I'd had vanilla cakes on my birthday, and it was like my tradition. A week before my birthday, Dylan told my parents he was allergic to vanilla. Total lie. Complete lie. He'd eaten things with vanilla millions of times. But my parents believed him and said we couldn't have a vanilla cake because Dylan could have an allergic reaction. The day of my party came, and when they brought out the cake, it was chocolate. Dylan's favorite. My friends were there. They sang happy birthday, and when I saw that chocolate cake, I felt something break inside me. I asked my mom quietly, "Why is it chocolate?" And she said, "Oh, Rachel, we already explained. Dylan is allergic to vanilla. Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. She called me dramatic for being upset because on my 16th birthday, a super important date, they had put Dylan's made-up needs over my only request. I looked at Dylan and he was looking at me with that smile I hated. That smile that clearly said I won again. And something in me completely broke. I got up from the table, grabbed my backpack, and told my friends, "Sorry guys, this party is over. Go home." My mom started yelling at me, "Rachel, what's wrong with you? You're ruining your own party." And I just said, "No, you ruined it. You ruined everything." And I went to my room. I could hear my parents apologizing to my friends, saying I was being difficult and going through a complicated teenage phase. They couldn't even admit they had done something wrong. That night, lying in my bed, I made a decision. I was going to leave that house as soon as I turned 18. I was going to work. I was going to save every penny. I was going to apply to universities as far away as possible, and I was going to get out of there. And that's exactly what I did. The next 2 years were the hardest of my life. I worked at a store after school, on weekends, any hours I could get. My parents thought the money was to buy things for myself, but I was saving absolutely everything. In a bank account I had opened with Megan's dad's help, because I knew that if my parents found out how much money I had, they'd find some way to take it from me or make me spend it on Dylan. I applied to universities in nearby cities. Nothing too far because I didn't have money to move to another state, but far enough that I wouldn't have to live at home. I got scholarships for my good grades, student loans, work-study jobs, whatever was necessary. My parents basically didn't help me at all with the process. They were too busy helping Dylan with his applications to specialized high schools and paying for private tutors that I never had. The day I turned 18 was a normal Wednesday. Nothing special. There wasn't even a celebration. My parents were busy with some event of Dylan's at his school. That same week, Megan's older brother Steven, who had a truck, helped me move. I had a one-bedroom apartment in a nearby city. It was small and not very nice, but it was mine. I packed all my stuff in boxes while my parents weren't home, left a note on the kitchen table that basically said, "I'm leaving, don't look for me," and I left. Steven was amazing. He helped me move all my stuff in one trip, and I remember when I closed the door of my new apartment for the first time, I started crying. Not from sadness, but from relief, you know? For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. My parents obviously freaked out when they saw the note. They called me like 50 times, sent me messages, showed up at my work trying to talk to me. My mom cried, saying, "How could you do this to us? We're your family. You can't just leave like that." And I thought, really? Now I'm family? After years of treating me like I was invisible, I told them I didn't want to have contact with them, that I needed space, to leave me alone. They didn't listen at first. They kept showing up, kept calling. So I blocked their numbers, blocked their social media, told my friends and coworkers not to tell them anything about me. I basically disappeared from their lives. The next 5 years were, without exaggeration, the best of my life. I enrolled in university, studied finance because I was always good with numbers, and honestly, I liked the idea of understanding how money works. I worked full-time while studying full-time. It was exhausting but worth it. I lived alone, paid my own bills, made my own decisions. Nobody told me I was being selfish or dramatic. Nobody favored another person over me. I was free. Academically, I did amazing. Turns out when you're not constantly stressed and sad about your family situation, you can concentrate much better on your studies. I ended up being one of the best students in my class, got internships at good companies, made professional connections. I had real friends, people who valued and respected me. I met my girlfriend Sarah at one of my jobs, and she was the first person in my romantic life who made me feel truly loved and appreciated. I told her everything about my family, and she couldn't believe my parents had been so horrible to me. She'd tell me all the time, "Rachel, you're amazing, and your parents are idiots for not realizing that." During those 5 years, I had absolutely no contact with my parents or Dylan. Honestly, I didn't even think much about them. I was so busy building my own life that I didn't have time or energy to think about the past. Megan stayed in contact with me, and sometimes told me things she heard about them through mutual acquaintances, like that Dylan had been expelled from 2 schools for bad behavior, that my parents kept spending all their money on him, things like that. But I just thought, not my problem, and continued with my life. Everything changed like 6 months ago. I was about to graduate, literally in my last semester, with the highest honors in my class, when suddenly I receive a message from an unknown number. It was my mom. I don't know how she got my new number. She probably asked someone we knew. But there was the message. It said something like, "Rachel, it's your mom. I know we haven't talked in a long time, but we need to see you. It's important, please." Part of me wanted to just block the number and move on, but another part of me, I don't know, was curious. What could be so important after 5 years of zero contact? I responded and told her, "Okay, we could meet in a public place." I suggested a pizza place that was like halfway between where I lived and where they lived. I didn't want them to know exactly where I lived or anything about my current life. The day of the meeting, I was super nervous. I'm not going to lie. Sarah offered to come with me for moral support, but I told her no, that this was something I had to do alone. I got to the restaurant and there were my parents, sitting at a table in the back. They looked older. My dad had more gray hair. My mom looked tired. I didn't feel much when I saw them. Honestly. I didn't feel the love you're supposed to feel when you see your parents after so long. I just felt like a kind of indifference. I sat down, and there was an awkward silence at first. My mom started crying almost immediately, saying things like, "We miss you so much. The house isn't the same without you. We've been so worried." My dad was quiet, just looking at me. I didn't say anything, just waited for them to get to the point. After like 10 minutes of my mom's dramatics, finally my dad said, "Rachel, we need your help." And there it is, I thought. Of course they need something. Turns out Dylan, who was now like 22 years old, had been a complete mess during the last few years. He had failed out of college, couldn't hold a job, kept living with my parents without paying rent or contributing anything. And my parents, being the geniuses they are, had kept spending money on him all that time. Last month, apparently, Dylan had seen a car he wanted, some kind of new sedan or something, and had pressured my parents to buy it for him. They, of course, couldn't say no to their precious Dylan, so they took out a loan and bought him the car. The problem was that now they were super in debt, couldn't pay the loan, and were about to lose the house. My mom looked at me with those teary eyes and told me, "Rachel, I know things weren't perfect between us, but you're our daughter and families help each other. Could you lend us money? Just to get out of this rough patch, we'd pay you back. I promise." I asked how much they needed, and my dad said, like $50,000. I just stared at them like they were crazy. $50,000? Did they really think that I, a 3-year-old college student, had $50,000 to give away? But then my mom said, "Well, Megan told us you're doing very well in university, that you have a good job, that you're going to graduate soon with honors. Surely you must have some savings, or you could get a loan." And that's when I realized why they were really there. They didn't care how I was doing. They didn't care about my life. They just wanted my money to get Dylan out of another mess they themselves had created. I told them I'd think about it and left the restaurant. I was furious, not just because of what they were asking me, but because of the audacity of showing up after 5 years of nothing and expecting me to rescue them. That night, I talked to Sarah about everything, and she was as angry as I was. She told me, "Don't give them anything. They deserve it for how they treated you." And I agreed, but at the same time, part of me wanted to do something. Not to help them, but to, I don't know, prove something. Or maybe to get revenge somehow. And then, an idea occurred to me. A probably terrible and definitely illegal idea. But in that moment, I didn't care. I studied finance. I knew people. I had contacts. I knew where to get fake money. Counterfeit bills that looked real enough to fool someone who didn't examine them too closely. I'm not going to go into details about how exactly I got the fake money because I don't want to completely incriminate myself, but let's say I had a classmate whose cousin knew someone who knew someone, and for the right price, you could get basically any amount of counterfeit money you wanted. I bought like $10,000 in fake bills. They looked incredibly real, had watermarks and everything. I sent a message to my mom and told her, okay, that I had gotten some money to help them. That it wasn't $50,000, but it was what I could do. We agreed to meet again, and when we met, I gave her an envelope with the money. My mom didn't even count it there in front of me. She just hugged me, crying and saying, "Thank you, my love. You're an angel. I knew we could count on you." I felt a bit bad in that moment. I'm not going to lie. But then I remembered all the years of being ignored and mistreated, and the feeling of guilt disappeared. I left the meeting and blocked their numbers again. I didn't want to have to answer questions or have more contact. I thought that would be the end of it all, that they'd use the money for whatever they needed and I'd never really know what happened. But oh, surprise, things got much more interesting. Like 2 weeks later, Megan called me, super upset. She told me, "Rachel, you're not going to believe what happened. Turns out Dylan, in his infinite stupidity, had taken some of the money I had given my parents, like $3,000 or $4,000, and had gone to a casino thinking he was going to multiply the money playing blackjack or something. When he tried to exchange the bills for chips, the casino employees immediately realized the money was fake. They called security. Security called the police, and Dylan was arrested right there for trying to use counterfeit currency. When Megan told me this, honestly, I didn't know how to react. Part of me felt guilty because, okay, yes, I knew the money was fake. But I never imagined Dylan would be stupid enough to take it to a casino. But the other part of me, the bigger part if I'm honest, thought this was pure karma. After years of Dylan manipulating and lying and making everything revolve around him, finally there were real consequences for his actions. Megan told me my parents were devastated, that Dylan would probably have to go to jail, that they were trying to get a lawyer but didn't have money because everything had been confiscated as evidence. She asked me if I knew anything about the money I had given them, if I knew it was fake. I told her I had no idea, that I'd gotten it from someone who owed me money from an old loan, and that I'd never verified it, that I couldn't believe they'd given me fake money. I don't know if she completely believed me, but she didn't push too hard either. The next few months were basically a legal circus for my family. Dylan ended up being charged with several counts related to counterfeit currency. My parents tried to contact me again, left messages saying they needed to talk to me about the money, that the police wanted to ask me questions. I just changed my number again and made sure nobody I knew gave them my new information. If the police really had wanted to find me for questioning, they probably would have, but apparently the case against Dylan was solid enough without needing to track down where the money had originally come from. Dylan ended up accepting a plea deal with the prosecution and received probation and community service instead of prison time, mainly because it was his first serious offense and because the judge felt sorry for him after hearing about his adoption background and blah blah blah. Basically, he got another special pass, even from the legal system. But at least now he has a criminal record. So that's something. My parents, according to Megan, are completely financially ruined. They eventually lost the house because they could never pay the loan for Dylan's car. Now they live in a small apartment and finally told Dylan he has to get his own place and his own life. A little late for that, if you ask me, but whatever. As for me, I graduated last month with the highest honors in my class. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. Sarah was there, Megan and her family were there, and that was all I needed. My parents didn't even know the exact date of my graduation, and even if they had known, they weren't invited. I got an amazing job at a finance firm that pays very well. I moved to a bigger apartment with Sarah, and life is good. Sometimes I think about what I did and wonder if I should feel bad. Technically, I committed a crime by giving them counterfeit money, although I never got caught and probably never will. But when I think about all those years of being ignored, of watching Dylan receive everything while I received nothing, of basically having to raise myself and get ahead without any support from my parents, honestly, I don't regret it much. They created Dylan, fed his manipulative behavior, and his sense that the world owed him everything, and eventually that came back to them in the worst possible way. The weekend after my graduation, Sarah and I went to a spa. We got massages, facials, the complete experience. While I was lying there, relaxed for the first time in months, I received a message from an unknown number again. It was my mom. She probably got my number from someone else. The message said, "Rachel, please, we need to talk. Everything is a disaster. Dylan is in trouble. We need your help." I read it, deleted it, and blocked the number. Then I went back to my massage and didn't think about them anymore. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever have a relationship with my parents again. Part of me thinks that maybe when they're old and really need me, we could reconnect somehow, but most of me just doesn't care. They had 18 years to be good parents to me and chose not to be. They chose Dylan over and over again, and now they're living with the consequences of that decision. I'm living my best life, doing well in my career, in a healthy relationship, surrounded by people who really value me. And that's more than I could have hoped for when I left that house at 18, thinking I'd never amount to anything. Sarah tells me I'm one of the strongest people she knows, that the fact that I got ahead, without any family support, says a lot about my character. And I guess she's right. It's not the ideal family story you imagine when you're a kid, but it's my story. And I lived it. And I survived it. And now I'm thriving. And if in the process my parents and Dylan ended up suffering the consequences of their own actions and bad decisions, well, that's life sometimes.